my son frantically called me at 3 a.m., screaming that his wife was dying. "Dad, Vanessa has a brain hemorrhage. The hospital needs $45,000 in cash right now, or they won't operate. Send it now." I looked at the clock, remembered the $20,000 I wasted on their last emergency, and replied calmly, "Call her precious father to handle it." Then I hung up, unplugged the phone, and went back to sleep. But the call from the police station the next morning revealed a truth so twisted it made me wish she had actually died. Before I continue this story, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against family members who only see you as a walking wallet. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story of justice travels. The red numbers on my digital alarm clock burned in the darkness. 3:14 a.m. The phone on my nightstand was screaming a shrill, mechanical shriek that shattered the silence of my Seattle home. I am Harold Bennett, 71 years old, a retired civil engineer. I spent 40 years building bridges, calculating loads, and ensuring structural integrity. I know the difference between a genuine emergency and a structural failure. And my son Brandon was a structural failure I had been trying to reinforce for 32 years. I picked up the receiver, my hand steady. I did not rush. At my age, panic is a luxury you cannot afford, and usually it is a waste of energy. "Dad." Brandon's voice was high-pitched, cracking with a hysteria that sounded rehearsed. "You have to help. It is Vanessa." She collapsed. "We are at Memorial Hospital. The doctors say it is a brain hemorrhage. It is critical." I sat up, adjusting my eyes to the dark room. The rain was hammering against the window pane, a constant rhythm in this city. I took a breath. "Slow down, Brandon. What are you asking for?" "They need a deposit, Dad. They won't take my insurance. They need $45,000 up front to book the specialist and the operating theater, and you have to wire it. Right now. If you do not, she is going to die. $45,000. The specific number hung in the air. It was a large sum, yet small enough to be a transfer limit on some of my accounts. My mind immediately flashed back to 8 months ago. That time it was a car accident. Brandon had called sobbing, claiming Vanessa had rear-ended a luxury sedan, and the owner was threatening to sue for hit and run unless we paid $20,000 in cash. I paid it. I drove to the bank, withdrew the cash, and handed it to my son. I never saw a police report. I never saw a photo of the damage. I never saw a repair bill. I only saw Vanessa the next week sporting a new diamond tennis bracelet and a tan from a weekend in Cabo. I learned my lesson. A bridge only collapses once before you rebuild it with stronger steel. Which doctor said they need cash up front for a life-saving emergency surgery in the United States of America? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the panic he wanted to hear. "Dr. Miller." "I do not know. Just send the money. Why are you asking questions?" "She is dying." I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand. My hand did not shake. I thought of Vanessa, 28 years old, a former catalog model who looked at me with the same affection a shark has for a seal. She had spent the last 5 years draining my son's bank account, and by extension, attempting to drain mine. "Brandon," I said, my voice dropping an octave, deadly calm. "I am not sending $45,000 at 3 in the morning based on a phone call. You are going to let her die. You cheap old man, you are sitting on millions and you are going to let my wife die. I am not letting anyone die." "Brandon, but if the situation is that dire, and if the hospital is truly violating federal law by refusing emergency care, then I suggest you call the one man who claims to have more money and power than God. Call her father. Call Richard Montgomery." There was a silence on the line, the kind of silence that happens when a script goes off the rails. Richard Montgomery. The man who wore Italian suits and leased luxury cars he could not afford. The man who had looked down on me at the wedding because my tuxedo was 5 years old. He is not picking up, Brandon stammered. Then keep trying, I said. Or call the police if the hospital is refusing care. But do not call me again tonight. Dad, if she dies, it is on you. I swear to God it is on you. Good night, Brandon. I hung up the phone. I did not just place it back on the cradle. I reached behind the nightstand and pulled the cord out of the wall jack. Then I picked up my cell phone and powered it down completely. I lay back on my pillows. The rain continued to beat against the glass. My heart rate was slightly elevated, perhaps 80 beats per minute, but it was slowing down. I was a widower. I lived alone in a 4-bedroom house that echoed with memories of a wife who would have been heartbroken to see what our son had become. I closed my eyes. I did not worry about Vanessa dying. I knew with the instinct of a man who has seen concrete crack before it breaks that Vanessa was very much alive. I went back to sleep. 7 o'clock came with the gray, washed-out light of a Seattle morning. I followed my routine. I showered, shaved, and went down to the kitchen to brew a pot of black coffee. The house was silent. The phone cord was still unplugged in the bedroom. I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had drawn a line in the sand last night. I expected a storm, but I did not expect the specific type of hurricane that was about to make landfall. I was pouring my second cup when the doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a firm, authoritative press. I walked to the door, tightening the belt of my robe. Through the frosted glass, I saw the silhouette. It was not Brandon. It was too broad, too upright. I opened the door. 2 police officers stood on my porch, water dripping from the brims of their hats. One was older, with a mustache that looked like a wire brush. His badge read, Officer Kowalski. Mr. Harold Bennett? He asked. Yes. Do you own a 2023 Cadillac Escalade license plate ending in 49 Zulu? I blinked. My mind raced. That car. I had bought it 6 months ago. It was supposed to be the family car for Brandon and Vanessa. They had told me they were trying for a baby, that they needed something safe for my future grandchild. I had paid for it, but I kept the title in my name, a rare moment of caution that I was now thankful for. Yes, I own it, I said. But my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Bennett, has possession of it. Is she okay? Did she pass away? I asked the question, but I felt no grief. I was bracing myself for the lie Brandon had told me 3 hours ago to become truth. Officer Kowalski exchanged a look with his partner. Pass away? No, sir. She is currently in holding at the 4th precinct, but the vehicle is a total loss. Holding, I repeated. You mean she is in jail? Yes, sir. At approximately 2:30 a.m. this morning, the vehicle was involved in a collision. It was driven through the front display window of Goldman's Fine Jewelry on 4th Avenue. I stared at him. The timeline clicked into place like a steel beam locking into a girder. 2:30 a.m. The crash happens. 3:14 a.m. Brandon calls me screaming about a brain hemorrhage and demanding $45,000. Was she injured? I asked. The brain hemorrhage. The officer frowned. No, sir. She was evaluated by EMTs at the scene. Aside from a minor lip laceration from the airbag, she is physically fine. However, she was extremely intoxicated. Her blood alcohol level was 0.18, more than double the legal limit. The preliminary toxicology screen also indicated the presence of cocaine. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my chest, but I suppressed it. It wasn't a brain bleed. It was a DUI and a felony property damage charge. The $45,000 wasn't for a surgeon. It was for bail for a lawyer, and probably to be off the jewelry store owner before charges were pressed, though it seemed they were too late for that. She is being charged with driving under the influence, reckless endangerment, and destruction of property. Kowalski continued. Since the vehicle is registered to you, we needed to notify you. It has been impounded. I nodded slowly. I understood everything now. The panic in Brandon's voice hadn't been grief. It had been the desperate fear of consequences. They needed me to clean up the mess before the sun came up. They needed my money to make the problem disappear, just like the car accident last year. Officer, I said, my voice steady. Thank you for telling me. I will come down to the station, not to bail her out, but to deal with my car. I dressed in my gray wool suit. I tied my tie with precision. I drank the rest of my coffee cold. I did not rush. Let them sit in the cold metal chairs of the precinct. Let the reality of the morning soak into their bones. When I arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of stale coffee and floor cleaner. I walked to the front desk, signed the papers for the vehicle impound release, and asked where the arraignment holding area was. I heard Brandon before I saw him. He was shouting, "This is a violation of her rights. She needs medical attention. She is in shock." I turned the corner. Brandon was standing near a public defender, his hair wild, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man who had been trying to hold back a landslide with his bare hands. He wasn't crying for his wife. He was angry at the world. Then he saw me. His face transformed. For a split second, relief washed over him. He thought the checkbook had arrived. He rushed toward me, ignoring the officer who stepped forward to block him. "Dad." "Thank God. You came. You have the money right. We have to get her out. They are treating her like a criminal." I stood my ground. I stood tall. I looked at my son, a man of 32 who still acted like a teenager who had broken a neighbor's window. "She is a criminal, Brandon," I said loud enough for the room to hear. "She drove my car into a jewelry store while drunk and high on cocaine." Brandon stopped. His face twisted. That is not what happened. She was having a medical episode. She was driving herself to the hospital because she felt faint and she lost control. You have to help us. The bail is set at $50,000. If you had just sent the money last night, we could have handled this differently, so that was the narrative. A medical episode. He was still trying to sell me the lie, even when the police report was right there in the officer's hand. I pulled the folded copy of the preliminary police report from my pocket. I snapped it open. Medical episode, I read from the paper. Subject was found laughing in the driver's seat. Subject attempted to offer responding officers a diamond necklace from the broken display case. Subject vomited on the patrol car. "Dad, stop." Brandon hissed, looking around. And here I pointed to the bottom line. Blood alcohol level 0.18. Positive for cocaine. Brandon's face went red, then purple. He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a venomous whisper. "So what, people make mistakes? She is your daughter-in-law. She is family. You have millions sitting in retirement accounts doing nothing. You are going to let her rot in a cell because of a mistake, you selfish old man. Mom would have never done this." "Do not speak of your mother," I said. The anger flared hot and sharp, but I kept it controlled. "Your mother worked double shifts so you could have braces. Your mother drove a 10-year-old sedan so you could go to college. This woman, this wife of yours, took the car I bought for the safety of my grandchild and turned it into a missile because she wanted to get high. I am not bailing her out, Brandon." "What?" He looked stunned. "I am not paying the $50,000. I am not paying for a lawyer. And I am certainly not paying for the damage to the jewelry store. That is on you and her." "But we don't have that kind of money," Brandon screamed. "You know we don't." "I know," I said. "I know you don't have it because I have been subsidizing your life for 5 years. I paid your rent when you were between jobs. I paid for your wedding because Richard Montgomery's assets were temporarily frozen. I paid for the phantom car accident last year." I looked him in the eye. The bank of Dad is closed, Brandon. Permanently. I turned to walk away. Brandon grabbed my arm. It was a mistake. He dug his fingers into my wool suit. If you walk out of here, Dad, if you leave her in there, don't bother calling us. You won't see us again. You won't see your grandchild. I stopped. I looked at his hand on my arm until he let go. Grandchild, I asked. Vanessa is pregnant. Brandon hesitated. His eyes darted to the side. Yes. Yes, she is. She just found out. That is why she was so upset. That is why she was drinking. She didn't know how to handle the news. She was scared. You are leaving your pregnant daughter-in-law in jail. I looked at him. I saw the lie. It was sloppy. It was desperate. If she was pregnant, why was she doing cocaine? If she was pregnant, why didn't he mention it on the phone at 3 a.m.? I will wait for the paternity test, I said coldly. I turned to Officer Kowalski, who was watching the domestic dispute with a tired expression. Officer, the Cadillac is a total loss. I do not want it back. Send it to the crusher. I will deal with the insurance. As for Mrs. Bennett, she is not my dependent. Do not call me for her again. I walked out of the precinct into the morning rain. Behind me, I could hear Brandon screaming insults, calling me a monster, a miser, a terrible father. I walked to the curb and hailed a taxi. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of severing a limb to save the body. I thought it was over. I thought I had made my point. I thought leaving her in jail for a few days would be the wake-up call they needed. I was wrong. I had no idea that I had just declared war. I went home and sat in my leather armchair, staring at the empty fireplace. The silence of the house felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. I realized I didn't know my son anymore. I didn't know who this man was, who could look me in the eye and lie about a brain hemorrhage while his wife was sitting in the back of a squad car. The next morning, the phone didn't ring. The doorbell did. I checked the security camera. A silver Mercedes was parked in my driveway. Leaning against it was a man in a bespoke navy suit, checking a gold watch. Richard Montgomery, Vanessa's father. He wasn't alone. Behind him, looking pale and disheveled, but very much free, was Vanessa. And Brandon. They hadn't spent the weekend in jail. Richard had bailed her out. And now the entire pack of wolves was at my door. I opened the door. Richard didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer an apology. He stepped past me into my hallway as if he were inspecting a property he intended to buy. Harold, he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. We need to have a serious conversation about dignity and compensation. Compensation? I asked, closing the door. For the humiliation, Harold. Richard turned his face hard. You left a Montgomery in a jail cell like a common streetwalker. You disgraced my daughter. You disgraced our alliance. Vanessa was clinging to Brandon. She looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed, but beneath the performance of the victim, I saw the rage. She hated me. She hated that I had said no. Bailing her out cost me $50,000, Harold Richard continued. Cash. I had to pull strings. I had to liquidate assets. I remembered 5 years ago. The wedding. Richard had pulled me aside, sweating, begging for a $50,000 loan to cover the catering because his offshore accounts were inaccessible. I had paid it. He never paid me back. I knew Richard didn't have $50,000. He must have borrowed it from a shark or leveraged something he couldn't afford to lose. I want you to reimburse me, Richard said, plus another $50,000 for pain and suffering. $100,000, Harold. And we forget this ugly incident ever happened. I looked at them. The three of them, standing in the house I built with my own hands, demanding money for a crime they committed. And if I don't, I asked, Then Vanessa spoke up. Her voice was raspy. Then Harold, you will never see the baby. She placed a hand on her stomach. I am pregnant, Harold. For real. The doctor at the jail confirmed it. You are going to have a grandson. And if you don't fix this, if you don't sign over this house to us so we can raise him in a safe environment, you will die alone. Brandon nodded. It is true, Dad. She is pregnant. You almost killed him with the stress. You owe us this. I looked at Vanessa's stomach. I looked at Richard's greedy eyes. I looked at Brandon's weakness. The pieces were moving on the board. They were playing the ultimate card. The grandchild. The heir. I realized then that this wasn't just about bail money. They wanted everything. They wanted the house. They wanted the savings. They wanted me gone. Get out, I said quietly. What? Richard stepped closer. Get out of my house. We aren't leaving until you sign a check, Brandon shouted. I walked to the landline phone on the hallway table. I picked it up. I am calling Officer Kowalski. I am reporting 3 trespassers, one of whom is currently out on bail and probably shouldn't be violating the terms of her release by harassing the victim of her property destruction. Richard's eyes narrowed. He recognized a losing hand. Come on, he spat at Brandon. He is senile. We will handle this another way. They left. But as they walked down the driveway, I saw Vanessa turn back. She didn't look sad. She looked calculating. She looked at my house, my windows, my roof, my garden, like she was measuring it for curtains. I locked the door. I went to my study. I opened my safe and pulled out a file. It was the contact information for a private investigator I had used years ago for a business background check. I needed to know the truth. Was she pregnant? Was Richard really solvent, and how deep did this rot go? I dialed the number. Find out everything I told the investigator. Start with Vanessa's medical records. And find out who Richard Montgomery really owes money to. I didn't know it then, but that phone call would uncover a secret so dark it would make a DUI look like a parking ticket. The war had just begun. The silence of my home didn't last long. It was shattered not by a phone call this time, but by the aggressive roar of an engine in my driveway. I looked out the window. A silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class was parked crookedly on the asphalt, taking up 2 spaces, its polished chrome gleaming aggressively under the gray Seattle sky. It was a rental. I knew it was a rental because Richard Montgomery didn't own cars. He leased illusions. He stepped out, adjusting a pinstripe suit that was a size too tight around the middle, the fabric straining against a lifestyle of rich food and poor discipline. He didn't look like a father concerned for a daughter who had just spent the weekend in a holding cell. He looked like a man arriving to collect a debt he believed the universe owed him. Behind him, Vanessa trailed like a wounded animal, though I suspected the limp was performative. She wore oversized sunglasses and a hoodie looking nothing like the woman who had terrorized a jewelry store 48 hours ago. Brandon brought up the rear, carrying her bag, head down the obedient servant, to the Montgomery ego. They didn't wait to be invited. Richard pounded on the door with the heavy gold ring he wore on his pinky finger. When I opened it, the smell of expensive, cloying cologne hit me instantly, masking the underlying scent of nervous sweat and stale cigarette smoke. He pushed past me into the foyer, his eyes scanning my living room, not with appreciation, but with appraisal. He treated my home like a showroom he was preparing to liquidate. "You have a lot of nerve, Harold," Richard announced, his voice booming, designed to intimidate. He spun around, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You left a Montgomery, my daughter, my flesh and blood, rotting in a cage with common criminals for 48 hours. You didn't just insult her. You declared war on our family's honor." He paced the room, his leather shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floors I had installed myself 20 years ago. "I had to liquidate crucial assets this morning to get her out." He lied smoothly. I knew for a fact Richard didn't have liquid assets. He had lines of credit and confident schemes. It cost me $50,000 in cash and favors to fix the mess you allowed to happen. But the money isn't the point, Harold. It's the disrespect. It's the trauma. He stopped in front of the fireplace, picking up a framed photo of my late wife, looking at it with disdain before setting it back down face down. We are going to settle this today. You are going to write a check. Not for the $50,000 bail. That would be too easy. You are going to write a check for $100,000. $100,000, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. For what? For dignity, Richard spat, adjusting his silk tie. For the pain and suffering my daughter endured because her father-in-law was too cheap to protect her. For the legal fees we are about to incur fighting these ridiculous charges, and for the damage to my reputation. I had to call in favors, Harold. Favors cost money. You are going to reimburse me for the bail, and you are going to pay $50,000 more as a penalty for your callousness. Consider it a tax on your stupidity. I looked at him. I looked at this man standing in my living room demanding 6 figures for dignity. And suddenly the room faded. I was transported back 5 years. It was the night before Brandon and Vanessa's wedding. My phone had rung at 2 a.m. It was Richard. He wasn't booming then. He was whispering, crying, terrified. He was in Las Vegas for a bachelor party. He had gambled away the money meant for the wedding catering hall, $50,000. He told me there were men threatening to break his legs if he didn't pay up by morning. He begged me, Harold, please, don't let Vanessa know. Don't let the wedding be ruined. I'll pay you back next month. I swear on my mother's grave. I had paid it. I wired $50,000 to a casino account to save my son's wedding from disaster, to save this man from his own vices. I never told Brandon. I never told Vanessa. And Richard, he never paid me back a dime. When I asked him about it a month later, he laughed it off, clapping me on the shoulder, saying, "We're family now, Harry. What's a little money between brothers?" And now here he was, the man whose legs I had saved, standing in my house wearing a rented suit demanding $100,000 for his honor. The rage that filled me wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It froze my veins. I looked at Vanessa, who was sitting on my sofa, examining her fingernails, waiting for her father to secure her payday. I looked at Brandon, who wouldn't meet my eyes because he knew he had to know deep down that this was extortion. "You talk about dignity, Richard," I said, stepping into his personal space. I smelled the stale tobacco on his breath. "You talk to me about reputation." I remember a phone call from Las Vegas 5 years ago. I remember a man crying like a child because he bet the catering money on black. Richard's face went pale. The bluster evaporated for a split second, replaced by genuine fear. He hadn't thought I would bring that up. Not in front of them. That was a misunderstanding, he stammered, glancing quickly at Brandon. "That has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," I countered. "You owe me $50,000, Richard. With interest, let's call it 75. So if you want to talk about debts, you write me a check first." Vanessa stood up, sensing her father was losing control of the narrative. "Stop it!" she shrieked. "Stop bringing up the past. This is about now. I am pregnant, Harold. I am carrying your grandchild, and you let me sleep on a concrete floor. If anything happens to this baby, it's your fault. Dad is right. You owe us. You owe us everything." She played the victim card with the expertise of a seasoned actress, clutching her stomach, her eyes filling with instant manufactured tears. Brandon rushed to her side, glaring at me. "Look what you're doing to her, Dad. Just pay him. Just give him the money so we can leave. Why do you have to be so difficult?" I looked at the three of them. The gambler, the actress, and the coward. They were a perfect trifecta of parasites. They truly believed they could bully me into submission. They thought my silence over the years was weakness. They didn't realize it was simply patience, and my patience had just run out. "I am not paying you a cent," I told Richard, my voice steady as a steel beam. "And if you don't remove that rental car from my driveway in the next 2 minutes, I will have it towed. And Richard, if you ever mention dignity in my house again, I will send the recording of that Las Vegas phone call to every business partner you have left." Richard's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. He leaned in close, his voice a low hiss meant only for me. "You'll regret this, old man. You have no idea who you're dealing with. We're going to take you for everything you have." He turned on his heel, signaling the others. They marched out, but the war wasn't over. It had just moved from the skirmish line to the trenches. As the door slammed shut, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I pressed the stop button on the voice recorder app I had been running since they pulled into the driveway. Evidence. That was just the first piece. I went to the window and watched them arguing in the driveway. Richard was screaming at Brandon, shoving him toward the car. Vanessa was checking her makeup in the side mirror, the tears miraculously gone. I knew then that I needed help. Professional help. I walked to my study, unlocked the drawer, and dialed the number of the private investigator I had contacted briefly years ago. It was time to dig up the skeletons Richard Montgomery thought were buried in the desert. The silence that followed Richard Montgomery's departure was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield before the second wave of artillery. I watched from my living room window as the silver Mercedes disappeared down the wet street. But my son and his wife did not leave. They stood in the driveway, huddled together under the gray Seattle drizzle, whispering furiously. I saw Vanessa gesturing wildly, her hand chopping the air, her face contorted not with the sorrow of a victim, but with the frustration of a con artist whose first gambit had failed. Brandon looked like a beaten dog, nodding rapidly, absorbing her venom and converting it into his own resolve. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing like a turbine. I knew they wouldn't give up. Parasites do not detach until they are forcefully removed or the host is dry. I had barely taken a sip when the front door opened. I hadn't locked it fast enough. They walked in soaked and shivering, bringing the cold, damp air with them. But the mood had shifted. The aggression of the police station and the entitlement of Richard's visit were gone. In their place was something far more insidious. Theater. Vanessa collapsed onto the sofa I had bought with my late wife 30 years ago. She let out a low, guttural moan, clutching her lower abdomen with both hands. Her face was pale, though I suspected she had wiped off her blush in the driveway. She curled into a fetal position, her breathing shallow and ragged. Brandon rushed to her side, dropping to his knees. "Baby, breathe. Just breathe. Is it the cramps again?" Vanessa nodded, squeezing her eyes shut, a single tear escaping. "It hurts, Brandon. It feels like something is pulling." Brandon turned to me. His eyes were wide, filled with a panic that might have actually been real this time, fueled by her performance. "Dad, look at her. She is in pain. The doctor at the jail said she is high risk. The stress of the accident, the night in the cell, and now you kicking her father out. You are killing her. You are killing your grandson." I stood by the kitchen island holding my glass. Grandson. They were doubling down on the pregnancy. It was the ultimate trump card. In any normal family, the mention of a grandchild would melt hearts, open checkbooks, and bridge divides. They were banking on my biology overriding my logic. "Is she bleeding?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Not yet," Brandon snapped. "But she is cramping. She needs bed rest. Absolute bed rest. No stress, no stares, no fighting." Vanessa looked up at me from the sofa. Her voice was a whisper, raspy and weak. "Harold, please. I know you hate me. I know you think I am a screw-up, but there is an innocent life inside me. Your flesh and blood. Do you really want to be the reason he doesn't make it? Do you want to explain to your son why he is holding a tiny coffin instead of a baby? The image was visceral. It was cruel. It was designed to bypass my brain and stab directly into my heart. And for a second, just a split second, I faltered. What if it was true? What if amidst the lies and the cocaine and the schemes, there really was a child? But then I remembered the police report. Cocaine. Alcohol. If she was pregnant and doing that, she was a monster. If she wasn't pregnant, she was a sociopath. Either way, I needed to know. What do you want, Brandon? I asked. We can't go back to her parents' place, Brandon said, standing up. It is too crowded. It is too loud. And we can't go back to our apartment because we are behind on rent, and the landlord is threatening eviction. We have nowhere to go, Dad. He took a step toward me. We need to stay here. Here, I asked. Yes. In this house. It is huge. You have 4 bedrooms. It is quiet. It is safe. Vanessa needs to be here until the baby is born. We need to stabilize. I looked around my home, my sanctuary. The idea of them living here, invading my space with their lies and their noise, made my skin crawl. No, I said. Dad, Brandon shouted. Listen to me. We aren't just asking for a guest room. We need security. We need to know you aren't going to throw us out in a week when your mood changes. He took a deep breath, reciting the lines he had clearly rehearsed in the driveway. You should sign the deed over to us. I froze. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Excuse me, transfer the title of the house to us, Brandon said, his voice gaining strength. Put it in Vanessa's name. Or mine. It gives her security. It reduces her stress knowing she has a permanent home for the baby. You can still live here, obviously. But you are 71, Dad. You are getting older. You don't need the responsibility of a property this size. The maintenance, the taxes. Let me take that burden off you. And where would I live? I asked, genuinely curious to see how far they would go. Brandon gestured vaguely. You could take the master suite. For now. But eventually with the baby we would need the space, the nursery, the equipment. Honestly, Dad, the finished basement is perfect for you. It has a bathroom. It is quiet. You like your privacy. It is like a separate apartment. The basement. My son wanted to move me into the basement of the house I built, while he and his felon wife played house in the master bedroom, where his mother died. He wanted to relegate me to the subterranean dark, while they liquidated my assets in the sunlight. I looked at Vanessa. She was watching me through slit eyes, gauging my reaction. She let out another moan, louder this time. Oh God, Brandon. The pain. I looked at Brandon. He was sweating. Dad, decide. Now. If we leave and she miscarries, I will never speak to you again. I will sue you for emotional distress. I will bury you alone. I closed my eyes. I thought about the private investigator I had called. I needed time. If I kicked them out now, they would disappear. They would go underground. I wouldn't be able to get their medical records, their financial paper trails. I needed them close. I needed them comfortable. I needed them to think they had won so they would get sloppy. This was a chess game, and sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to trap the king, or in this case, the queen. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face fall into a mask of defeat and worry. I looked at Vanessa's stomach, forcing my eyes to soften. A grandson, I whispered. Yes, Dad, Brandon said, sensing the crack in the armor. A boy. We are pretty sure it is a boy. I sighed, a long, rattling exhalation of an old man giving up. I cannot have that on my conscience, I muttered. If there is a baby, There is, Vanessa cried. Okay, I said. Okay, you can stay. Brandon let out a breath, a smile breaking through his anxious mask. Thank you, Dad. You are doing the right thing. But I raised a hand. I am not signing the deed. Not yet. I need to consult with my lawyer about the tax implications. You know how the IRS is. Brandon frowned, but Vanessa nudged him with her foot. She knew not to push too hard too fast. Fine, Brandon said. But we need the master bedroom. Vanessa needs the soaking tub for her back. And she needs the space. I looked at the stairs leading up to the room I had shared with my wife for 30 years. I swallowed my pride. It tasted like bile. Take it, I said softly. I will move my things to the basement. It is cooler down there anyway. Vanessa sat up, the pain miraculously manageable now that she had secured the territory. Thank you, Harold, she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. You really are saving us. We will take good care of the house. You won't even know we are here. That was a lie. I would know. I would know every time they opened a drawer, every time they touched a keepsake. I will need help moving the bed down, I said. I will do it later, Brandon promised. Let's get Vanessa settled first. They didn't wait. They didn't ask if I needed time to clear out my personal effects. They immediately stood up and headed for the stairs. I watched them ascend, my son, supporting his wife, acting the hero in a tragedy of their own making. They walked up the stairs like conquerors claiming a castle they had breached without firing a shot. I stood alone in the hallway. I felt small. I felt old. But then I looked at the phone in my pocket. I had recorded the entire conversation, the threats, the coercion, the admission of their financial desperation. I walked to the basement door and opened it. The smell of damp earth and old cardboard greeted me. It was an unfinished space, cold and dim. It was a humiliation. But as I walked down the creaking wooden steps into the dark, I smiled. They thought they had banished me to the dungeon. They didn't realize they had just moved into an observation tank. The basement was where the junction box for the phone lines was. It was where the main router for the internet sat. It was where I kept the spare keys to every filing cabinet in the house. By moving me down here, they had given me access to the nervous system of the house. I sat on a stack of old magazines in the dim light. I could hear their footsteps above me. The heavy thud of Brandon's boots. The click of Vanessa's heels. She wasn't limping anymore. I heard the sound of my bedroom door opening. Let them have the bed. Let them have the view. I took out my phone and dialed the investigator again. Change of plans, I whispered into the darkness. Do not just look into their records. I need you to find out who Richard Montgomery uses for a doctor, and I need a listening device. They just moved in. I was the rat in the walls now, and they were going to learn that the foundation of a house is the most dangerous place to ignore. The grandson was their shield, but they had just handed me the sword. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time was right, I would bring the whole house down on top of them. Living in the basement of my own home was an education in humiliation I never expected to enroll in at 71 years old. The ceiling above me became a sounding board for the destruction of my life. I heard every footstep, every scrape of furniture being dragged across the hardwood floors I had sanded by hand, every laugh that echoed down the ventilation shafts. They didn't just move in, they invaded. It wasn't a cohabitation, it was a hostile occupation. For the first 2 days, the noise was constant. Brandon and Vanessa were nesting, as my son called it. To me, it sounded like looting. I stayed downstairs, sitting on a folding chair, surrounded by boxes of my tax returns and old engineering manuals, listening to them erase 40 years of my history to make room for their temporary future. I told myself it was strategy. I told myself I was the spider waiting in the center of the web, feeling the vibrations of the prey. but patience has a taste, and it is bitter. On the morning of the third day, the garbage truck was scheduled to arrive. I heard the heavy front door open and close repeatedly, followed by the sound of dragging plastic on concrete. I waited until I heard Brandon's footsteps retreat back into the house before I walked out the basement's side door. The driveway was lined with black garbage bags, 10 of them. My heart hammered a warning against my ribs. I walked to the curb. The bags weren't tied shut properly. They were overstuffed, bursting at the seams, with the haste of someone trying to hide evidence. I saw a flash of blue fabric through a tear in the plastic. I froze. I knew that blue. It was cornflower blue. My late wife, Elizabeth, had worn a cardigan that color on our 40th anniversary. She had died 3 months later. I had kept her clothes in the cedar closet in the master bedroom untouched, preserved a shrine to the woman who had built this life with me. With trembling hands, I ripped the bag open. It wasn't just the cardigan. It was everything. Her silk scarves, the quilt she had hand-stitched for our unborn grandchildren, her gardening hat still stained with the soil of the rose bushes she loved, her books dog-eared and beloved. They were all there, shoved into garbage bags along with coffee grounds and empty takeout containers. They hadn't just moved my things to storage. They were throwing my wife away. I fell to my knees on the wet pavement. I pulled the quilt out, shaking off the coffee grounds. I clutched the gardening hat to my chest, smelling the faint fading scent of lavender detergent and earth. The rage that filled me was white-hot, blinding a physical pain that nearly doubled me over. I wanted to march upstairs, kick down the door, and throw them out onto the street with my bare hands. I wanted to scream until my throat bled, but I didn't. I remembered the doctor's note. I remembered the investigation. If I reacted now, if I showed them the depth of my anger, they would know I was a threat. They would accelerate their plans. They would claim I was violent, senile, dangerous. They would use my grief as a weapon to lock me away. I stood up. I wiped the rain and tears from my face. I spent the next hour quietly moving the bags into my garage, hiding them behind the stack of winter tires. I salvaged what I could. I rescued Elizabeth from the trash. When I went back inside, I didn't go upstairs. I sat in the dark of the basement, stroking the fabric of her quilt. They had crossed the final line. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about erasure. They wanted to erase her, and they wanted to erase me. That evening, the house, which was supposed to be a sanctuary of absolute bed rest for my high-risk daughter-in-law, began to vibrate. It started with music. A thumping bass that shook the floor joists above my head. Then came the voices, lots of them. Laughter, the clinking of glass. I checked my watch. 8:00 p.m. I walked up the basement stairs and opened the door to the kitchen. The scene that greeted me was not a convalescent ward. It was a frat party. There were at least 20 people in my living room. Strangers. They were drinking my wine bottles I had been saving for special occasions and eating sushi from large platters spread out on my dining table. And in the center of it all was Vanessa. She was not in bed. She was not resting. She was wearing a tight, shimmering dress that showed no sign of a baby bump, holding a martini glass, and laughing raucously at something a man in a leather jacket was saying. She looked radiant. She looked energetic. She looked like a woman celebrating a lottery win. Brandon was by the stereo system pouring shots of my 18-year-old scotch for 2 of his old college buddies. I stood in the doorway, a ghost in my own home. I was wearing my old cardigan and reading glasses. The music stopped as people noticed me. The laughter died down, replaced by awkward whispers. "Who's the old guy?" someone muttered. Vanessa turned. Her smile didn't falter. It just hardened. She didn't look ashamed. She looked annoyed that the help had wandered out of the quarters. "Harold," she said, her voice loud enough to carry over the room. "We didn't think you'd be up. We were just having a small celebration of life for the baby." trying to keep the spirits positive. The doctor said positive vibes are crucial for the pregnancy. Bed rest, I said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room. You said absolute bed rest. You said stairs were dangerous. Vanessa rolled her eyes, a theatrical gesture for her audience. Oh, Harold, don't be such a downer. I'm sitting down most of the time, and these are my support system. I need support right now. God knows I'm not getting it from you. Brandon rushed over, putting a hand on my shoulder, trying to steer me back to the basement door. He smelled of whiskey and fear. Dad, come on. Let her have this. She's been so depressed since the accident. She needs this. Just go back downstairs. I'll bring you a plate of sushi later. I don't eat raw fish, I said, looking at the bottle of scotch in his hand. That bottle was a gift from your grandfather. It's just booze, Dad, Brandon hissed. Stop embarrassing us. Go downstairs, please. I looked at the crowd. They were looking at me with pity. The crazy old dad living in the basement. The burden. I turned around and went back down. I didn't make a scene. I didn't kick everyone out. I let them drink my scotch. I let them dance on my floors. Because every bottle they opened, every guest they invited, was another nail in their coffin. I took out my notebook and wrote down the date, the time, and the description of Vanessa's bed rest. 3 days later, the bill arrived. I was bringing in the mail, something I had to do quickly before they woke up at noon. Amidst the flyers and bills, there was a thick envelope from the credit card company. It was addressed to me, but for the supplementary card account. I frowned. I had given Brandon a supplementary card 10 years ago, when he was in college, for emergencies only. A tow truck, a textbook, a flight home. I had forgotten to cancel it. I assumed he had lost it years ago. I tore open the envelope. My eyes scanned the statement. One charge. One single transaction made 2 days ago. Luxury boutique. Downtown Seattle. $5,250. I stared at the number. $5,000. I walked into the garage where the recycling bin was kept. I dug through the paper recycling until I found it. A glossy, heavy paper bag with the boutique's logo, and inside crumpled up the receipt. Item, designer handbag. Calfskin, limited edition. I smoothed out the receipt. I looked at the date. It was the morning after the party. While I was in the basement eating toast, Vanessa had gone shopping. I went back to the basement and sat at my makeshift desk. I logged into my bank account. The transaction was pending. I could call the bank. I could report it as fraud right now. I could cancel the card and have the police knock on the door in an hour. But then I heard footsteps upstairs. I heard Vanessa's voice, high and excited. Babe, you have to see it in the light. It's gorgeous. It's exactly what I needed. The retail therapy is literally healing me. I feel so much less stressed about the baby now. It was a lot of money, Van, Brandon's voice mumbled. Dad might see it. He won't see anything, she scoffed. He's senile. He probably doesn't even check his statements anymore. And if he does, we'll just say it was for medical expenses, a special back brace or something. He won't know the difference. He trusts us. Well, he has to. I listened to them laugh. They were mocking me. They were spending my money on vanity while living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and treating me like a prisoner. I looked at the receipt in my hand. $5,000. In the state of Washington, theft over $5,000 wasn't a misdemeanor. It was a Class B felony. It carried a prison sentence of up to 10 years. This wasn't just a purchase. This was a pair of handcuffs. I didn't call the bank. I didn't cancel the card. Instead, I folded the receipt carefully and placed it in a plastic evidence bag I had bought online. I put it in my safe box, along with the recording of the bed rest party. My eyes fell on the calendar. My private investigator had told me Richard Montgomery was hosting a business gala in 2 weeks to court new investors for a non-existent tech startup. Vanessa would be there. Brandon would be there. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that felt foreign on my face. "Buy the bag, Vanessa," I whispered to the ceiling. "Enjoy it, because it's going to be the most expensive accessory you ever owned." I picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Sterling, the doctor who had warned me. "Elliot," I said when he answered. "It's Harold. I need a favor. I need you to recommend a specialist for my daughter-in-law. A very specific kind of specialist. One who can perform a 4D ultrasound in front of an audience." The plan was forming. It was brutal. It was final. And it was going to cost them a lot more than $5,000. It was going to cost them their freedom. I sat in a vinyl booth at the back of a 24-hour diner called the Rusty Spoon, staring at a cup of coffee that tasted like battery acid and regret. It was raining again, a relentless Seattle drizzle that blurred the neon lights outside, turning the world into a smear of gray and red. I had told Brandon I was going to the hardware store to buy parts for the boiler. It was a lie, of course. I was meeting a ghost. My private investigator, a man who went simply by the name Cross, slid into the booth opposite me. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was doing. He simply placed a thick manila envelope on the sticky table between us. Cross was a former federal agent who had been pushed out for being too thorough. He had the eyes of a man who had seen the bottom of the human soul and found it wanting. "You are not going to like this, Harold," he said, his voice gravelly. "I have seen some twisted things in my career. Families tearing each other apart for scraps. But this is special." I looked at the envelope. My hand hovered over it. Inside that paper casing was the truth about the people currently sleeping in my master bedroom, drinking my wine and waiting for me to die. "Give it to me," I said. Cross tapped the folder. "Start with the blue tab. That is the medical history." I opened the folder. The first document was a copy of a medical file from a private clinic in Los Angeles. It was dated 3 years ago. The patient's name was Vanessa Montgomery. I scanned the medical jargon, my engineering brain looking for the structural flaw. And then I found it. It wasn't a diagnosis. It was a procedure. Laparoscopic tubal ligation. Voluntary. I froze. I read it again. And a third time. Tubal ligation. She had her tubes tied. I looked up at Cross. It means she cannot get pregnant," Harold Cross said, taking a sip of his water. "It is physically impossible. She had the procedure done 3 years ago to ensure her modeling career wouldn't be interrupted by unwanted consequences, as she put it in her consultation notes." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the damp diner air. The baby, the grandson, the heir, the reason I had let them move in, the reason I was sleeping in a basement, the reason Brandon was currently painting a nursery upstairs in a shade of soft yellow. It was all a lie, a biological impossibility. "She isn't pregnant," I whispered. "She was never pregnant." Cross shook his head. "No. And she never will be. The cramping, the morning sickness, the cravings, all theater. She is playing a role, Harold, and she is playing it for an audience of one. You." I thought about the scene in my living room. The tears, the hand on her stomach, the way she had looked at me and said, "Do you want to explain to your son why he is holding a tiny coffin?" It was a monstrosity. She wasn't just lying about money. She was inventing a life just to threaten it. She was holding a hostage that didn't exist. I felt a wave of nausea. I thought of Brandon, my foolish, weak son. He was so excited. He was terrified of being a father, but he was excited. He believed her. He was painting a room for a ghost. Why, I asked, why lie about something so easily disprovable? A doctor would see it in a second. "That is why they needed the money up front," Cross explained. why they avoided the hospital after the crash, why they need you to pay for a private specialist who is actually just a friend of theirs. They are buying time. Buying time for what? To get your name on a deed, Cross said, or to get you to sign a will. Once the ink is dry, she will have a tragic miscarriage. She will blame the stress you caused her. She will blame the stairs in your house. She will play the grieving mother to secure her position, and you will be the villain who killed his grandson. I closed the medical file. My hands were shaking, not from age but from a rage so pure it felt like rocket fuel. I wanted to go home and throw her out the window. But Cross put a hand on the envelope. Wait, Harold. That is the appetizer. The main course is under the red tab. I looked at him. How could it get worse? She was faking a pregnancy to steal my home. What else could there be? I opened the red tab. It was a background check on Richard Montgomery, or rather, the man who called himself Richard Montgomery. His real name is Richard Slick, Daily Cross said. He has done time in Nevada and Florida for fraud, confidence tricks, and grand larceny. He isn't a businessman. He is a grifter. He declares bankruptcy like other people declare their taxes. I nodded. That didn't surprise me. The rented suits, the gambling debts, it fit. But keep looking, Cross said. Look at the photos. I pulled out a stack of glossy photographs. They were taken by surveillance teams, some grainy, some clear. They showed Richard and Vanessa, but not in the way a father and daughter interact. There was a photo of them in Miami 5 years ago. They were sitting at a beachside bar. Richard's hand was resting on Vanessa's thigh high up. They were laughing, their faces inches apart. There was another photo of them entering a hotel room. Richard had his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Vanessa was kissing his neck. I stared at the image. My brain refused to process it. It rejected the data. This is incest, I stammered. Cross shook his head slowly. No, Harold. It isn't incest. He pulled out a birth certificate. Vanessa's birth certificate. Father unknown. Then he pulled out another document. A marriage license from Las Vegas dated 7 years ago, annulled 2 weeks later. The names on the license, Richard Daly and Vanessa Kinsley. They aren't father and daughter, Harold. They are partners. They are lovers. I dropped the photo. It fluttered to the table, landing face up. The image of the man I thought was my son's father-in-law, kissing the woman I thought was my son's wife, burned into my retinas. They are a team, Cross said, his voice devoid of emotion. They run what is called a sweetheart swindle, but on a massive scale. Richard finds a mark, a young man with a wealthy older parent. He positions Vanessa as the bait. She seduces the son. Richard plays the wealthy, disapproving father to add pressure and legitimacy. They get the son hooked, get married, and then they bleed the family dry. My son, Brandon. He wasn't a husband. He was a mark. He was the victim of a long con that had been running for 5 years. Every fight, every reconciliation, every financial crisis, it was all scripted. Richard and Vanessa weren't fighting over money. They were splitting the take. The $50,000 I wired to Vegas for the wedding, they probably toasted me with champagne while they spent it. The $20,000 for the car accident, profit. And Brandon, did he know I looked at Cross? Does my son know? Cross sighed. That is the only thing I cannot confirm. But given how they treat him, the way they isolate him, the way they make him beg you for money, I doubt it. He is the tool they use to crack the safe. If he knew, he wouldn't be painting a nursery. He is useful to them only as long as he believes the lie. I sat back in the booth. I felt like the floor had opened up and swallowed me whole. The horror was absolute. My son was sleeping in a bed next to a woman who was sleeping with the man he called Dad. They were mocking him. They were mocking us all. This entire time I thought I was fighting a greedy family. I wasn't. I was fighting a professional criminal enterprise. They didn't just want my money. They were cannibals. They had eaten my son's life, his youth, his trust, and now they were coming for the marrow of my bones. How much do they owe? I asked. Cross flipped to the final page. Richard O'Daly is in deep. He owes $300,000 to a syndicate in Chicago. That is why they are accelerating the timeline. They are desperate. They need your house, Harold. They need your liquid assets. If they don't pay up in a month, they are dead. Literally. So I am their piggy bank, I said. I am the only thing standing between them and a concrete pair of shoes. Exactly. I looked out the window at the rain. I thought about the basement. I thought about Elizabeth's clothes in the garbage bags. I thought about Brandon, weak, foolish Brandon, who had defended his wife's honor while she plotted his destruction with her lover. I could go to the police right now. I had the evidence. I had the fraud. I could have them arrested by dinner time. But that wasn't enough. Arrest was too clean. It was too sterile. They had humiliated me. They had humiliated my son. They had defiled my home. I looked at the photo of Richard and Vanessa kissing. Can you get me a copy of this? I asked, tapping the photo. A digital copy. High resolution. Cross nodded. I can get you anything you need. What are you planning? Harold. I picked up the medical file. I looked at the words, two-ball ligation, one last time. I am planning a gender reveal party, I said, my voice cold as the grave. They want a family gathering, I will give them one. I pulled out my checkbook. I wrote Cross a check for double his fee. Keep digging, I told him. I want video. I want audio. I want to know what they say when they think no one is listening. I want to know exactly which hotel room Richard is staying in. And Cross. Yes. I need you to buy the debt. Cross blinked. Excuse me, Richard's debt. The $300,000. Find out who holds it. Buy it. I will wire you the funds. Cross smiled. It was a terrifying expression. You want to be his loan shark? Standing up and buttoning my coat. I want to be his owner. I left the diner and walked out into the rain. The water felt good on my face. It felt cleansing. I wasn't an old man anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the architect of their ruin. I drove home slowly. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. They were asleep in my bed. I walked down to the basement. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and listened to the silence of the house. Vanessa was upstairs, dreaming of my money. Richard was in his hotel, dreaming of his escape. Brandon was dreaming of a child that would never be born. Sleep well, I whispered to the floorboards above me. Sleep well, my dears, because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. I opened my laptop. I had work to do. I had to plan a party, and I had to buy a debt. The grandfather was about to become the executioner. The basement was cold, but my blood was boiling hot. I sat on the edge of the cot I had dragged down from the attic, staring at my reflection in a cracked mirror I had propped against a stack of old paint cans. The man looking back at me did not look like a millionaire. He did not look like a mastermind. He looked like a tired, defeated old man with gray stubble and dark circles under his eyes. Perfect. That was exactly the costume I needed. I spent 10 minutes practicing my tremor. I held my hand out, letting it shake just enough to suggest neurological decline, but not enough to look fake. I practiced my posture, rounding my shoulders, letting my head hang low. I had to sell the performance of a lifetime to an audience of professional liars. If I failed, they would strip me clean and leave me to rot. If I succeeded, I would lead them directly to the slaughterhouse. I heard them upstairs. It was mid-morning. The smell of bacon and expensive coffee drifted down through the floorboards. They were eating my food, planning their future with my assets. It was time to interrupt breakfast. I walked up the stairs, slowly, deliberately dragging my feet so they would hear me coming. I opened the door to the kitchen. The conversation stopped instantly. Brandon was at the stove. Vanessa was sitting at the island, scrolling on her phone, looking healthy and vibrant for someone who was supposedly on bed rest. They looked at me with annoyance. I was the unwanted guest in my own home. Dad, Brandon said, his voice sharp. I told you I would bring you a plate later. Vanessa needs quiet. I didn't answer immediately. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. I let out a wheezing breath. I looked at them with wide, watery eyes. I need to sit down, I stammered. Vanessa rolled her eyes, but she didn't say anything. Brandon sighed and pulled out a chair. What is it now? Do you need your pills? I sat down heavily. I looked from Brandon to Vanessa. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. It was a trick I had learned from watching Vanessa for the past week. I went to the doctor, I lied. My voice was a rasp. The other day, when I said I was going to the hardware store, Brandon stiffened. Which doctor? Not my usual one, I whispered. A specialist. I have been having episodes. Blackouts, pain. I clutched my chest theatrically. They ran tests, I continued. It is bad, son. It is very bad. They call it rapid onset arterial degeneration. It is aggressive. Brandon frowned. I have never heard of that. Neither had I said. Because I just made it up. But Brandon wasn't a doctor. He was a desperate man drowning in debt. He would believe anything that promised a quick resolution to his problems. The doctor says I don't have much time, I said, dropping my voice to a hush. Maybe a month. Maybe less. My heart. It is just giving out. The room went silent. I saw the look pass between Brandon and Vanessa. It wasn't grief. It wasn't shock. It was a flash of pure, unadulterated excitement. It was the look of a gambler seeing the ball land on their number. Oh, Harold, Vanessa said, her voice dropping into her fake sympathy register. That is terrible. Are you sure? I nodded. I am sure. And that is why I need to talk to you. About the money. Money, Brandon asked, trying too hard to sound casual. What money, Dad? The house? No, I said. Not the house and the other money. I paused. I let them lean in. I let the greed pull them toward me like gravity. I never told you, Brandon, I said, looking at my hands. I never told you because I wanted you to be self-sufficient. But your mother and I, we didn't just save. We invested. In the 90s. Tech stocks. Startups. I looked up at him. I have a portfolio, Brandon. It is in a blind trust. I kept it secret from everyone. Even the IRS doesn't know the full extent of it. How much? Vanessa asked. She couldn't help herself. The question shot out of her mouth like a bullet. I took a shaky breath. Current market value. It is just over $2 million. Liquid. The air left the room. I saw Brandon's jaw go slack. I saw Vanessa's eyes dilate. $2 million. It was enough to pay off Richard's debt to the mob 7 times over. It was enough to buy their freedom. It was enough to buy their silence. 2 million, Brandon whispered. Dad. Why didn't you tell us? We have been struggling. I know, I said, injecting a note of regret into my voice. I was stubborn. I was a foolish old man. I thought I had more time. I thought I would leave it to you in the will. But now, I coughed a dry rattling sound. Now I am dying. And I don't want the government to take half of it in estate taxes. I don't want it tied up in probate for years. I want to give it to you now. While I am still here to see you enjoy it. Vanessa stood up. She walked over to me and knelt beside my chair. She took my hand in hers. Her skin was soft, manicured, and cold. "Oh, Harold," she said, squeezing my hand. "You are so generous. We will take care of you. We will make your last days the best days of your life. We promise." I looked at her. I saw the predator behind the mask. She was already spending the money in her head. "There is just one thing," I said. "Anything Dad Brandon said. Anything you want." "I want to do this right," I said. "I want to sign the transfer papers formally. I want a ceremony." "A ceremony?" Brandon asked. "Yes. I want a dinner, a real family dinner, at the Obsidian Room." The Obsidian Room was the most exclusive, expensive restaurant in Seattle. It was where senators and tech moguls ate. It was a place where appearances mattered more than anything. "I want Richard to be there," I said. Vanessa stiffened. "My dad?" "Yes," I said. "I know we had our differences. I know I was harsh to him. But if I am dying, I want to make peace. He is family. He is the grandfather of my grandchild. I want him to witness the transfer. I want to toast to the future of this family. I want to see us all together happy one last time." I squeezed Vanessa's hand back. "Please, Vanessa, bring your father. Let me apologize to him. Let me buy everyone the most expensive meal on the menu. Let me sign the papers in front of everyone so there is no doubt that I love you." It was the perfect bait. Richard Montgomery or Slick Daly was a narcissist. He wouldn't be able to resist a public apology. He wouldn't be able to resist a free 5-star meal. And he certainly wouldn't be able to resist watching me sign over $2 million to his partner in crime. Vanessa looked at Brandon. Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Dad," Brandon said. "We will make it happen." "When tomorrow night," I said. "I don't want to wait. I feel weaker every day." "Tomorrow," Vanessa agreed. She stood up, her face flushed with victory. "I will call Dad right now. He will come. I know he will. He has a big heart. He forgives easily." She pulled her phone out and hurried out of the room, practically running to tell her lover that the old man was finally paying out. Brandon stayed in the kitchen. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and hunger. He walked over and put an arm around my shoulders. It felt heavy like a yoke. "You are doing a great thing, Dad," he said. "Mom would be proud." I forced myself not to flinch. I forced myself to look him in the eye and smile a weak, trembling smile. "I just want you to be safe, son," I said. "I just want to provide for my grandson." "You are," Brandon said. "You really are. He helped me up. He didn't send me back to the basement." "Why don't you go lie down in the living room?" he suggested. "The sofa is more comfortable. I will get you a blanket." Suddenly, I was no longer the nuisance in the basement. I was the golden goose. I was the VIP. I lay on the sofa in the living room listening to them frantically making arrangements on the phone. I heard Vanessa calling the restaurant using my name to secure a private room. I heard her calling Richard, her voice low and excited. "He bought it," she whispered into her phone. "Hook, line, and sinker. He is dying, Richard. He admitted it. He wants to give us $2 million tomorrow night. Yes. Cash transfer. Stocks. Everything. You have to be there. He wants to apologize. Yes, bring the good suit." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. They were celebrating. They were high-fiving. They were already planning their escape from the debts that were crushing them. They didn't know that I had already visited the bank that morning. They didn't know that I hadn't gone to sell stocks. I had gone to buy liabilities. I had spent the last 48 hours with my lawyer, drafting a very different set of documents. I had leveraged my actual assets, which were substantial, though not in the way they thought, to purchase the debt notes that Richard owed to the Chicago syndicate. It had cost me a fortune in liquid cash and favors, but I now owned the paper that said Richard Daly owed $300,000. And I had contacted the bank that held the mortgage on Brandon's house, the house he had abandoned, but still legally owned. I bought that note too. I wasn't just their father or their victim anymore. I was their creditor. I was the bank. And tomorrow night at the Obsidian Room, I wasn't going to sign a check. I was going to call in the loans. I lay there feigning sleep while my son tucked a blanket around me. "Rest up, Dad," he whispered. "Tomorrow is a big day." He had no idea. The next 24 hours were a blur of faux kindness. Vanessa brought me tea. Richard sent a massive floral arrangement to the house with a card that read, "Family is everything. Forgiveness is divine." I almost vomited when I read it. I played my part. I stumbled. I forgot words. I asked about the baby, constantly patting Vanessa's flat stomach with a trembling hand, watching her flinch but force a smile. "It is a strong boy," she would say. "He kicks just for you, Grandpa." Lies. Layers and layers of lies. When the time came to leave for the restaurant, I insisted on wearing my old tuxedo. It was a bit loose now, hanging off my frame, which only added to the image of the dying patriarch. "You look handsome," Harold Vanessa lied, adjusting my bow tie. "Let's go," Brandon said, checking his watch. "We don't want to keep Richard waiting." We drove to the city in silence. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the city lights like obsidian. It was fitting. We pulled up to the restaurant. The valet opened the door. I stepped out, leaning heavily on a cane I had bought at a pharmacy. I looked up at the towering glass facade of the restaurant. Inside, waiters in white jackets were moving like ghosts. This was it. The stage was set. The players were in position. I walked inside, flanked by my son and his wife. They were gripping my arms not to support me, but to ensure I didn't escape before the ink was dry. We were led to the private dining room in the back. The doors opened. Richard Montgomery was standing at the head of the table. He was wearing a new tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. He looked triumphant. He looked like a king welcoming a surrendering general. "Harold," he boomed, spreading his arms wide. "You made it." I shuffled forward. I looked him in the eye. I let my lip quiver. "Richard," I croaked. "Thank you for coming." I sat down at the head of the table. The tablecloth was white and crisp. The silverware gleamed. "Let's eat," I said. "And then we sign." Richard grinned, a wolfish, hungry grin. To family, he toasted, raising his glass. "To family," I repeated. I took a sip of water. I watched them drink. I watched them smile. I checked my watch. 1 hour. 1 hour until the dessert course. 1 hour until the screen I had requested be set up for a memorial video would turn on. 1 hour until their lives ended. I picked up my menu. "I recommend the steak," I said. "It is very rare, just the way you like it." The morning of the dinner at the Obsidian Room, I told Brandon I needed to go to the bank to finalize the liquidity for the transfer. It was the lie they wanted to hear, the music they were dancing to. They practically pushed me out the door, their eyes shining with the anticipation of the windfall. Brandon even offered to drive me, but I insisted on taking a taxi. I told him I needed a moment alone to say goodbye to my life's savings. He bought it, of course. He patted my shoulder with that patronizing touch of a man who thinks he has already won, telling me to take my time. I took a taxi, but I didn't go to the local branch where I kept my checking account. I directed the driver to the financial district, to the glass and steel tower that housed the private wealth division of Sovereign Capital. I walked into the lobby wearing my frayed trench coat and scuffed shoes. The security guard stepped forward, his hand raising to stop the old man who looked like he had lost his way. but then the branch manager, Mr. Whitman, appeared from the elevator banks. He had been expecting me. Mr. Bennett, Whitman said, rushing over and extending a hand. "Good to see you, sir. Please come right up." The guard stepped back confused. I walked past him, my spine straightening just a fraction. This was my world, the world of steel concrete and compound interest. In Whitman's corner office overlooking the gray expanse of Puget Sound, I declined the coffee. I didn't have time for pleasantries. I placed my black leather briefcase on the mahogany desk. "I need to make 2 transactions today, Whitman," I said, "and I need them expedited. I want the paperwork done by 5 o'clock. Whitman nodded, opening his laptop. "Of course. Are we moving funds to the trust as discussed?" "No," I said. "I am making a purchase." I slid a piece of paper across the desk. It contained the loan number and the servicing details for a mortgage. "This is the mortgage on the property at 42 Willow Creek Lane," I said. "It is currently held by your retail division. The borrower is Brandon Bennett." Whitman typed the numbers in. He frowned. "Mr. Bennett, this mortgage is distressed. The borrower is 6 months behind. It is in pre-foreclosure. The bank is preparing to seize it." "I know," I said. "I want to buy the note." Whitman looked up, surprised. "You want to pay it off?" "No," I corrected him, my voice hard. "I do not want to pay it off. I want to buy the debt. I want to be the lien holder. I want to own the paper. I want the legal right to foreclose." Whitman paused. He was a smart man. He understood the difference between a gift and a leash. "We can assign the note to your holding company," he said slowly. "It is an unusual request for a family member, but given your standing with the bank, we can authorize the transfer of the lien. You would effectively become the bank." "Do it," I said. And the second transaction, I pulled out the file Cross, my investigator, had given me. It was a dossier on the debts of Richard Daly, alias Richard Montgomery. It was a mess of high-interest loans judgments and a significant note held by a private lending firm that Sovereign Capital had recently acquired. "This man," I said, tapping Richard's photo. "He has a consolidated debt portfolio with your distressed asset group, $300,000. Unsecured high risk." Whitman scanned the file. "Yes. We acquired this debt bundle last month. It is toxic. We were planning to write it off or sell it to a collection agency for pennies on the dollar." "I will buy it," I said. "Full face value." Whitman took off his glasses. "Mr. Bennett, with all due respect, that is a terrible investment. The man is insolvent. You will never collect." I didn't smile. I didn't blink. "I am not buying it for the return on investment, Whitman. I am buying it for the leverage. I want to own every cent of debt this man has. I want to be the one who decides if he files for bankruptcy or goes to prison for fraud. I want his financial life in my pocket." Whitman looked at me. He saw the cold fire in my eyes. He saw the engineer who calculated stress points and breaking thresholds. He realized I wasn't building a bridge, I was building a guillotine. He nodded. "I will have legal draw up the assignment of debt. It will cost you." I waved a hand. "The cost is irrelevant. Take it from the offshore yield. Just get me the papers. I need physically signed documents stating that Harold Bennett is the sole creditor for both Brandon Bennett and Richard Daly, and I need them today." I sat in that office for 3 hours while the legal team scrambled. I watched the rain hit the glass. I drank the water they brought me. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel the heart condition I had invented. I felt powerful. For years I had let them think I was weak. I had let them think I was a resource to be mined. I had paid their bills, fixed their mistakes, and cushioned their falls. And they had repaid me with betrayal. They had tried to gaslight me, imprison me, and bury me. Now the dynamic was shifting. When Whitman returned, he had 2 thick folders, one blue, one red. "The blue folder contains the assignment of the mortgage," he said. "You are now the mortgagee. You have the right to demand full payment of arrears or initiate eviction proceedings immediately. I touched the blue folder. My son's house. The roof over his head. It was mine. And the red folder. The assignment of the commercial debt judgment against Richard Daley Whitman said, "It is legally binding. You own his liabilities. If he has any assets, you can seize them. If he has any income, you can garnish it. You essentially own him." I took the folders. They felt heavy, substantial. They were weapons of mass destruction made of paper and ink. "Thank you, Whitman," I said, standing up. "Mr. Bennett," he said, walking me to the elevator. I hope you find what you are looking for." I looked at him. I already have. I left the bank and walked out into the busy street. I held the briefcase tight against my chest. I didn't go straight home. I went to a copy shop and I made 3 copies of every document. I mailed 1 set to my lawyer, Dr. O'Malley. I put 1 set in a safety deposit box at a different bank. And I kept the originals in the briefcase. When I returned to the house, it was late afternoon. The atmosphere was festive. Vanessa was humming in the kitchen. Richard had apparently called to say he was already getting ready, polishing his shoes for the big event. Brandon was pacing the living room, looking at real estate listings on his phone. "Dad." "You're back," Brandon exclaimed when I walked in. He eyed the briefcase. Is that it? The paperwork for the trust?" I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who was now waiting for me to die so he could buy a sports car. "Yes, son," I lied, my voice steady. "This is the paperwork. Everything is settled." He smiled a wide, relieved grin that made him look like a child on Christmas morning. "That is great, Dad. Really great. You won't regret this." I walked past him, heading for the basement stairs. "I am going to rest for a bit before dinner," I said. "I want to be fresh for the signing." I went down to my subterranean room. I placed the briefcase on the small table. I opened it and looked at the red and blue folders. They were expecting a check. They were expecting a transfer of wealth. They were expecting freedom. Instead, I had brought them chains. I sat in the dark and waited for the sun to go down. I waited for the time to put on my tuxedo. I waited for the moment when I would walk into the obsidian room and turn the lights on. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and the sentence was going to be total financial annihilation. The clock ticked, tick-tock, time to go. The obsidian room was not merely a restaurant. It was a cathedral dedicated to the worship of excess. The walls were lined with black velvet. The chandeliers were dripping with Swarovski crystals, and the view from the 50th floor offered a panoramic look at the city of Seattle, a city that looked like a circuit board of gold and white lights in the darkness. It was the kind of place where a glass of water cost more than a tank of gas, and tonight I was paying for all of it. We entered the private banquet hall I had reserved. I walked in last, the tapping of my cane lost under the swell of a string quartet playing in the corner. I had expected a small, intimate family gathering. I had expected Richard, Vanessa, and Brandon. I should have known better. Parasites do not feast alone. They invite the swarm. Vanessa had filled the room. There were at least 30 people seated at the round tables adorned with white orchids and silver candelabras. I recognized none of them. They were a collection of Seattle's aspiring elite women, with faces frozen by Botox, and men in suits that were too shiny, too tight, and too loud. They were the friends Vanessa had met during her days as a catalog model, people who measured friendship in Instagram likes and proximity to wealth. She had invited them not to celebrate my generosity, but to witness her ascension. She wanted an audience for her victory lap. Look at her. She was moving through the room like a politician, her hand resting protectively on her flat stomach, accepting congratulations for a pregnancy that didn't exist. She was wearing a new gown, something silk and backless, that probably cost another $3,000 of my money. She whispered to her friends, pointing at me, the frail old man in the corner. I could read her lips. He is leaving us everything. It is so sad, but we are going to honor his legacy. I took my seat at the head table. To my right sat Brandon. To my left, Richard. Richard was in his element. He had invited his own entourage. I saw 3 men sitting near the bar, looking out of place among the socialites. They were older, with hard eyes and cheap haircuts. These were his business partners, the bottom feeders he owed money to, or perhaps new marks he was planning to swindle with the $2 million he thought he was getting tonight. He was holding court, pouring vintage Dom Perignon like it was tap water. "You really outdid yourself, Harold," Richard said, leaning over to me. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and anticipation. "This is class. Pure class." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had pimped out his own partner to my son. "Nothing is too good for family, Richard," I said, my voice raspy and weak. Richard clapped me on the back. "That is the spirit. You know, I have been looking at some investment opportunities for the trust fund. Real estate in the Caymans, high yield. We can discuss it next week after the transfer." He was already spending it. He was already laundering it. I looked at my son. Brandon wasn't mingling. He wasn't drinking the champagne. He was staring at his phone hidden under the white tablecloth. I glanced down. On his screen was a configurator for a McLaren 720S. He was choosing the color, papaya orange. He wasn't thinking about his dying father. He wasn't thinking about the burden of wealth. He was thinking about how fast he could drive away from his mediocrity. "Brandon," I said softly. He jumped quickly, flipping his phone over. "Yeah, Dad, you okay? Do you need water?" "I am fine, son," I said. "I just wanted to know." "Are you happy?" Brandon looked at his wife, who was laughing loudly at a table nearby. He looked at Richard, who was ordering another bottle. He looked at the view of the city. "Yeah, Dad," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "I am. I really am. I feel like things are finally going to be okay. We are going to be safe." Safe. He thought he was safe. He was standing on a trapdoor with a noose around his neck, and he thought he was safe because I had bought the rope. Dinner was served. 5 courses, truffle risotto, wagyu beef, lobster flown in from Maine. I watched them eat. I watched Vanessa gorge herself on the food she hadn't paid for. I watched Richard order a cognac that cost $400 a shot. They ate with the voracious appetite of people who had been starving for status their entire lives. I didn't eat. I pushed the food around my plate. I sipped my water. I was feeding on something else. I was feeding on the anticipation. As the waiters cleared the dessert plates, gold-leafed chocolate domes that melted under warm caramel, the room began to quiet down. The string quartet stopped playing. The lights dimmed slightly. It was time. Vanessa stood up and tapped her spoon against her champagne glass. The sharp ring cut through the chatter. "Everyone, please," she said, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. "If I could have your attention." The room fell silent. 30 pairs of greedy eyes turned toward the head table. "We are gathered here tonight for a very special, albeit bittersweet reason," Vanessa began. "As many of you know, my father-in-law, Harold Bennett, has been the rock of this family. But recent news about his health has forced us to confront the fragility of life." She wiped away a fake tear. A few of her friends cooed sympathetically. But Harold, being the incredible man he is, decided he didn't want to wait until he was gone to secure our future. He wanted to see us fly. He wanted to bless his grandson before he even arrives. So tonight, we are here to celebrate his generosity, his love, and the transfer of his legacy to his son Brandon and myself. She gestured toward me. "Harold, Would you like to say a few words before we sign the papers? Applause broke out. Polite golf clap applause. Richard was beaming. Brandon looked like he was about to faint from excitement. I grabbed my cane. I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. I stood up slowly, exaggerating the effort, letting my legs shake. I looked frail. I looked beaten. I walked to the small podium that had been set up near the front of the room next to a large projection screen I had requested. I gripped the sides of the podium to steady myself. I looked out at the crowd. I looked at the strangers drinking my wine. I looked at the woman who had faked a pregnancy. I looked at the man who had scammed me. I looked at the son who had betrayed me. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said into the microphone. My voice was low, but the speakers amplified it, filling the room with a deep, resonant bass. "Thank you all for coming," I continued. "It warms my heart to see so many friends." I looked directly at Richard. When I found out about my condition, I realized I had unfinished business. I realized that money is just paper. It is what you do with it that matters. It is who you share it with that defines you. Richard nodded, raising his glass to me. "I have spent 40 years building my wealth," I said. "I built bridges. I connected people. I ensured that things didn't fall apart when the weight became too heavy. And now, at the end of my road, I want to ensure that everyone in this room gets exactly what they deserve." Brandon smiled. He was squeezing Vanessa's hand under the table. "I told my family I had a surprise for them," I said. "I told them I wanted to sign the papers in front of witnesses, and I will. But first, I wanted to share a little video, a tribute, if you will, to the love that brought us all here tonight, to the truth that binds this family together." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. Vanessa beamed. She thought it was a montage of baby photos. She thought it was a collection of memories. Richard leaned back in his chair, expansive and relaxed. I looked at them one last time. I memorized their faces, the hope, the greed, the ignorance. I pressed the button. The lights in the room went black. The large screen behind me flickered to life, and the nightmare began. The screen behind me didn't show a montage of family picnics or baby photos. It didn't show the ultrasound Vanessa had been waving around like a winning lottery ticket. It showed a timestamp. October 14th, 11:42 p.m. The location text in the corner read, "The Sea View Motel Room 204. The room was silent save for the hum of the projector. The guests squinted, confused. Why was Harold showing a security feed? Then the camera angle switched. It was inside the room. The quality was crystal clear, high-definition evidence paid for by my rage. On the screen, 2 people entered the frame, a man and a woman. They were laughing, stumbling slightly, a bottle of champagne in the man's hand. The man was Richard. The woman was Vanessa. But they weren't hugging like family. Richard grabbed Vanessa by the waist, spinning her around. He kissed her, not on the cheek, on the mouth. Deeply, passionately. It was the kind of kiss that consumes, the kind of intimacy that belongs to lovers, to partners in crime, to people who share a bed and a secret. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. It sounded like a sudden depressurization at 30,000 feet. A wine glass shattered somewhere in the back. On screen, Richard pulled away, laughing. "We did it, baby," he said, his voice amplified by the expensive sound system I had rented. "The old man bought the whole act. $2 million. We are going to be living like kings in the Caymans." Vanessa giggled, unzipping the back of her dress. "And Brandon? What about the idiot?" Richard shrugged, pouring the champagne. "Leave him. Or bring him along to carry the luggage. Who cares? Once the check clears, he is just baggage." The video froze on that frame. Richard laughing. Vanessa undressing. The timestamp burning in the corner. I looked at the table. Vanessa was frozen, her face a mask of absolute bloodless terror. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. The arrogance, the confidence, the mother-to-be glow, it all evaporated, leaving behind the naked panic of a con artist caught in the spotlight. Richard dropped his glass. It hit the table, splashing vintage cognac onto his white tuxedo shirt, staining it like a wound. He stared at the screen, at his own face, realizing that his life as he knew it was over. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Brandon. My son was staring at the screen. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't breathing. He looked like a man who had just watched a car crash in slow motion and realized he was in the passenger seat. His face was gray. His hands were gripping the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were white. The denial was fighting with the evidence in his eyes, a terrible, violent struggle. "Dad," he whispered. The word came out like a plea. "Dad, what is this?" "It is the truth, son," I said into the microphone. My voice didn't shake. "It is the truth you refuse to see." "Turn it off," Vanessa shrieked, finally finding her voice. She lunged toward the podium, her silk dress rustling. "Turn it off. It is fake. It is AI." "He made it up." She clawed at the laptop, but I stepped back. I clicked the remote again. The video disappeared. A new image replaced it. It was a document. A medical record on official letterhead from the Los Angeles Fertility Center. Patient name Vanessa Kinsley Montgomery. Date of procedure August 12, 2020. Procedure bilateral salpingectomy. I read the medical term out loud, my voice echoing off the velvet walls. Bilateral salpingectomy. For those of you who did not go to medical school, that means the surgical removal of the fallopian tubes. It is a permanent form of sterilization. I pointed at the screen with my cane. This procedure was performed 3 years ago. 3 years before she met you, Brandon. 3 years before she claimed to be carrying my grandson. 3 years before she moved into my house and demanded I sleep in the basement to protect a pregnancy that is biologically, physically, and medically impossible. The room erupted. The polite silence of the elite shattered into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and shouts. The friends Vanessa had invited, the social climbers, the sycophants, were now looking at her with revulsion. They realized they were extras in a fraud. They realized they had been toasting a lie. Vanessa stopped halfway to the podium. She looked back at the screen. The document loomed over her, 50 feet high, an undeniable monolith of her deception. She touched her stomach instinctively, then realized the absurdity of the gesture. There was nothing there. There never had been. She turned to Brandon. "Brandon, baby, listen to me. It is a mistake. That isn't my file." He forged it. "You know I love you." "You know," Brandon stood up. His chair fell backward with a crash. He looked at Vanessa. Then he looked at Richard. He looked at the man he had called Dad for 5 years. The man who had just been kissing his wife on a 40-foot screen. "You," Brandon choked out. He pointed at Richard. You told me I was part of the family." Richard sneered. The mask of the benevolent patriarch dropped completely. He saw the game was up. He saw the exits were blocked. "Grow up, kid," Richard spat, wiping the cognac from his shirt. "You were never family. You were a paycheck, and a small one at that." Brandon made a sound, a raw animal noise of pain, and lunged across the table. He grabbed Richard by the lapels of his rented tuxedo. They crashed into the table, sending crystal glasses and silverware flying. The white orchids trampled underfoot. "Security," I shouted into the microphone, but I didn't move to stop them. Let him fight. Let him feel the physical reality of his betrayal. Waiters rushed in to pull them apart. Brandon was sobbing, swinging wildly. Richard was cursing, trying to protect his face. Vanessa was screaming, backing away toward the door, her eyes darting around like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. I watched them. I watched the chaos I had orchestrated. It was ugly. It was violent. It was heartbreaking. But it was clean. It was the lancing of a boil that had been poisoning my family for years. I tapped the microphone again. The feedback squeal cut through the noise. "Sit down," I commanded. The authority in my voice, the voice of a man who had commanded construction crews on skyscrapers, silenced the room. The waiters held Brandon back. Richard straightened his jacket, panting. Vanessa froze by the exit. "You wanted an inheritance," I said, looking at my son. "You wanted me to sign over my legacy. You wanted the easy way out." I walked around the podium. I stood in front of the screen, the medical record glowing behind me like a halo of judgment. "I don't have $2 million in liquid cash for you, Brandon," I said softly. "I never did. That was a lie. A lie I told to get you all in this room, to get you to drop your guard." Brandon looked at me, blood dripping from a cut on his lip. "What? But I do have something for you," I continued. "I have the only thing that matters." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the original copy of the debt assignment I had purchased that morning. The red folder. And the blue folder. "I bought your debts," I said. "I bought the truth." I tossed the folders onto the ruined table. They landed amidst the spilled wine and broken glass. "This is the inheritance I leave for you, Brandon. The truth. The truth about your wife, the truth about your father-in-law, and the truth about yourself." I looked at Vanessa. "There is no baby. There is no money. There is only the police officer waiting in the hallway." As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the room opened. Officer Kowalski walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. He wasn't smiling. He was holding a pair of handcuffs. "Vanessa Bennett," he asked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Richard Daly." Vanessa's knees gave out. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor in her expensive silk dress. Richard looked at the window, calculating the drop, then realized he was 50 floors up. He slumped in his chair, defeated. "You set us up," Richard whispered, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and awe. "You old bastard. You set us up." "No, Richard," I said, leaning on my cane. "I just turned on the lights." I turned to my son. He was standing alone in the wreckage of the dinner. He looked at his wife being handcuffed. He looked at the medical record on the screen. He looked at me. "Dad," he wept. "I didn't know. I didn't. I swear I didn't know." I looked at him. I loved him. But love wasn't enough anymore. "I know you didn't know," I said. "That is the problem, Brandon. You chose not to know. You chose the lie because it was easier. And now you have to pay the bill." I signaled the waiter. "Clear the table," I said. "The party is over." The screen went black. The only sound left was the click of handcuffs and the sobbing of a man who had lost everything he thought he had. The silence in the room was shattered by the metallic ratchet of handcuffs tightening around Vanessa's wrists. It was a sound finality sharper than the breaking of crystal glasses, heavier than the silence of the stunned guests. Vanessa was still on the floor, her silk dress pooling around her like a puddle of oil. She looked up at Officer Kowalski with mascara running down her cheeks, the arrogance of the past months washed away by the cold reality of the law. "You are making a mistake," she wailed, her voice cracking. "My father will sue you. My father knows the mayor." Officer Kowalski didn't blink. He pulled her up roughly, forcing her to stand on her trembling legs. "Your father isn't who you think he is, ma'am," Kowalski said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "And neither are you. You aren't being arrested for a traffic violation. You are being charged with insurance fraud in the first-degree conspiracy to commit grand larceny and identity theft." He turned her around, so she faced the room, faced the people she had tried to impress with my money. "We found the text messages," Vanessa Kowalski continued. The ones between you and your father planning the crash at the jewelry store. It wasn't an accident. You staged it. You thought if you totaled the car and claimed a medical emergency, the insurance payout would cover your credit card debt. But you got greedy, you got drunk, and you got caught. A murmur of disgust rippled through the crowd. The socialites who had been drinking my champagne moments ago now looked at Vanessa as if she were a contagious disease. She had crashed a car not out of negligence but for profit. She had endangered lives for a check. Richard Daly tried to stand up, smoothing his rented jacket with a shaky hand. Now, officer, he began trying to summon the ghost of his charm. Let's not be hasty. I am sure we can work this out. My legal counsel. Sit down. Richard, a second. Officer barked, pushing him back into the chair. Or should I call you by your real name, Richard Daly? We ran your prints from the glass you were drinking from. You have outstanding warrants in Nevada and Florida for wire fraud and forgery. You are done. Richard slumped. The air went out of him. The illusion of the wealthy patriarch dissolved, leaving behind a small, frightened con man in a suit he didn't own. The officer pulled his arms behind his back. The second pair of handcuffs clicked. I watched them. It was the moment I had paid for. It was the return on my investment. But I wasn't finished. The police were there for the crimes against the state. I was there for the crimes against me. I walked over to Richard. I leaned heavily on my cane, bringing my face close to his. He smelled of sweat and fear. Harold Richard whispered, his eyes darting around the room, "Help me. Please. I will pay you back. I swear. I have a deal coming through in Miami. Just post the bail. Just get me out of this." I smiled. It was a cold, wintry smile. "You don't understand, Richard," I said softly, so only he and Brandon could hear. "I don't want your money. I want your life." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photocopy of the red folder I had received from the bank. I held it up in front of his face. "Do you recognize this loan number?" I asked. "The $300,000 you borrowed from the syndicate in Chicago. The debt you have been running from for 5 years. Richard's eyes widened. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. How did you—" "They were going to kill you, Richard," I said. "They were going to break your legs and throw you in the lake. But you got lucky. They sold the debt." I paused. I let the hope flicker in his eyes for a second before I extinguished it. "They sold it to me." Richard made a choking sound. "I own you," I whispered. "I own every cent of debt you have. I own the interest. I own the penalties. When you go to prison, I will be the one putting a lien on your commissary account. When you get out in 10 or 15 years, I will be waiting. I will garnish every paycheck you ever earn. I will seize every asset you ever try to hide. You will never have a dollar to your name that doesn't belong to me." I tapped him on the cheek with the folded paper. "You are my property now, Richard. Enjoy the cell. It is the only rent-free housing you will ever have." Richard began to sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a man who realized he had been outplayed by the very person he thought was a fool. The officers hauled him up and began to drag him toward the exit. Vanessa screamed as she was led out behind him, begging Brandon to do something, begging me to have mercy. I watched them go. The double doors swung shut, cutting off her screams. The room was silent. The guests were frozen, unsure if they should leave or applaud. I didn't care about them. I turned to the last person at the table. Brandon was sitting in the ruins of the dinner. His face was buried in his hands. He was shaking. He looked like a child who had woken up in a burning house. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, filled with tears and confusion. "Dad," he choked out. They arrested them." "Yes," I said. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me sit here? Why did you let me believe? Because you needed to see it. I said, my voice hard. You needed to see exactly who you were sleeping with. You needed to see what your greed bought you. I tossed the blue folder onto the table in front of him. It landed with a heavy thud. What is this? Brandon asked, wiping his nose. Open it. He opened the folder. He looked at the documents. He frowned, trying to make sense of the legal jargon through his tears. This is my mortgage, he said. The house on Willow Creek. The house you haven't paid for in 6 months, I corrected him. The house you abandoned to move into mine. The house that was in pre-foreclosure. I leaned in. I bought the note, Brandon. I am the bank. Brandon looked up, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Oh, thank God. So you saved it. You paid it off, I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Saved it. No, son. I didn't pay it off. I bought the right to foreclose. Brandon froze. Dad. You have 24 hours, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. You have 24 hours to remove any personal belongings you want to keep from that house. Because at 8:00 p.m. tomorrow, I am changing the locks. I am seizing the property to recover the losses I incurred supporting your lifestyle. But where will I go? Brandon stammered. We gave up the apartment. You can't kick me out of my own house. It isn't your house, I said. It never was. You never paid for it. And as for where you will go, I looked around the luxurious room. I looked at the uneaten lobster. You wanted to live in my basement, didn't you? You wanted to put your father underground so you could live in the light. I straightened my tie. The basement is closed, Brandon. My house is closed. You are a 32-year-old man. Figure it out. I turned my back on him. Dad, he screamed. You can't do this. I am your son. I have nothing. I stopped. I didn't turn around. You have your health, I said, and you have the truth. That is more than you gave me. I signaled the security guards by the door. Please escort Mr. Bennett out, I said. He is disturbing the other guests. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my son crying, begging, shouting. But I didn't stop. I walked out of the obsidian room, leaving the bill on the table for a meal no one had eaten. The air outside was cold and clean. The rain had stopped. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. The fallout from the dinner at the obsidian room was not swift. It was a slow, agonizing disintegration that played out in the headlines and courtrooms of Seattle. My lawyer, Dr. O'Malley, kept me updated with a grim satisfaction. He told me that the bond between Richard and Vanessa, that unbreakable partnership of con artists, had shattered before they even reached the booking station. In the back of the police van, they turned on each other with the ferocity of starving rats. Vanessa screamed that she was a victim of grooming, that Richard had brainwashed her since she was 19. Richard countered that Vanessa was the mastermind, the one who targeted grieving families and lonely men because she had the face of an angel and the soul of a leech. They traded secrets for leniency, but there was no leniency to be found. The evidence I had provided, the medical records, the video, the financial trails, was too absolute. But the true humiliation came from the public nature of their exposure. The press had a field day. The father-daughter grifters who were actually lovers. It was sordid. It was disgusting. In prison status is everything, and they had none. Dr. O'Malley told me that Richard had been placed in protective custody not because he was a target for his debts, but because the general population looked at him with such revulsion that his safety couldn't be guaranteed. He was isolated alone with his bankruptcy and the knowledge that I owned the very shirt on his back. Vanessa fared no better. The socialites she had desperately tried to impress gave interviews calling her a sociopath. She went from drinking champagne in a silk dress to scrubbing floors in an orange jumpsuit, despised by the world she wanted to rule. And then there was Brandon. My son didn't go to jail. He hadn't committed a crime technically. His crime was stupidity. His crime was greed. And his punishment was reality. I stuck to my word. At 8:00 p.m. the following night, exactly 24 hours after the dinner, the locksmiths arrived at the house on Willow Creek Lane. Brandon was still there. He was sitting on the front steps, surrounded by a few trash bags filled with his designer clothes and electronics. He hadn't packed anything sentimental. He hadn't packed photo albums. He had packed his gaming console and his sneakers. He watched as the locksmiths changed the tumblers. He watched as the foreclosure notice was taped to the door. He didn't fight. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. It started raining around 9. A cold, relentless Seattle downpour that soaked through the clothes he hadn't paid for. He had nowhere to go. Vanessa's friends weren't answering his calls. His own friends had drifted away years ago, tired of his arrogance. He had no job. He had no credit. He had no car. At 10:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I was expecting it. I was sitting in the living room, the upstairs living room, reading a book. I wasn't hiding in the basement anymore. I walked to the door. I turned on the porch light. Brandon was standing there. He was soaked to the bone. His hair was plastered to his skull. He was shivering violently. He looked exactly like he did when he was 10 years old and had fallen off his bike in the rain looking for his father to pick him up. But he wasn't 10. He was 32. Dad. He chattered, his teeth clinking together. Dad, please. It's cold. I opened the door, but I didn't step back. I filled the frame. I have nowhere to go, Brandon said, wiping water from his eyes. They took the house. They took everything. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was stupid. I see that now. Please, just let me in, just for tonight. I will sleep in the basement. I don't care. The basement. The place he had banished me to. The irony was bitter. You can't stay here, Brandon, I said. Dad, stop. You made your point. You won. Richard is in jail. Vanessa is gone. It is just us now. We are family. You can't leave your son on the street. I looked at him. I looked for the son I had raised. I looked for the man who had integrity. But all I saw was a man who was sorry he got caught. A man who was only standing here because his other options had evaporated. If Vanessa had succeeded, if I had signed that check, he would be in the Caymans right now, laughing at my grave. I am not your safety net anymore, Brandon, I said. I am not the bank. I am just a man you tried to bury. I reached into my pocket. Brandon's eyes lit up. For a second, he thought I was reaching for my wallet. He thought I was going to hand him cash, a credit card, a lifeline. The greed was reflexive, ingrained in his DNA after years of enabling. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. I handed it to him. What is this? He asked, his hands shaking as he took it. A check. No, I said. It is a list. He unfolded it. It wasn't a check. It was a printout from the city website. These are the addresses of the homeless shelters in downtown Seattle, I said. The one on 3rd Avenue has beds open until midnight. If you hurry, you can make it. They have hot soup. They have counselors who can help you find a job. Brandon stared at the paper. Then he stared at me. The realization hit him. There was no rescue. There was no secret stash. This was it. You are kidding, he whispered. You are actually kicking me out. You kicked yourself out, Brandon, I said. You kicked yourself out the moment you chose a lie over your father. You are 32 years old. You have 2 hands and a brain. Use them. But I will die out here, he screamed, the entitlement breaking through the pity. You won't die, I said calmly. You will struggle. You will be cold. You will be hungry. And for the first time in your life, you will understand the value of $1 because you will have to earn it. I reached for the door handle. Good luck, Brandon. Dad, wait. I didn't wait. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. The sound was loud, a final click that severed the past from the future. I stood there for a moment listening. I heard him pounding on the wood. I heard him screaming my name. I heard him crying. It hurt. It hurt more than the basement. It hurt more than the betrayal. It was the pain of amputating a limb to save the patient. But I knew that if I opened that door, if I gave him a blanket or $1, he would never learn. He would never be a man. He would stay a parasite until the day I died. I turned off the porch light. I went back to the living room. I sat down in my chair. I picked up my book. My hands were trembling slightly, but my heart was steady. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Eventually, the pounding stopped. Eventually, the screaming faded. And then there was only silence. I had lost a son. But for the first time in years, I had reclaimed my life. And that was a trade I had to make. The salt spray of the Puget Sound tastes different when you are standing on the deck of your own 60-foot vessel. It tastes like freedom. It has been exactly 1 year since the dinner at the Obsidian Room. 1 year since I turned the lights on and watched the cockroaches scatter. Today, the only noise I hear is the gentle lapping of waves against the hull of my boat, a sleek cruiser I named the Foundation. It seemed appropriate. After all, I had to tear my life down to the studs to build something that could actually weather the storm. I sat in the captain's chair holding a fishing rod, watching the line bob in the dark water. I wasn't really fishing for food. I was fishing for peace. And for the first time in a decade, I had caught it. My lawyer Sarah tells me that Richard is not enjoying his time in state prison. Apparently, his fellow inmates do not appreciate a con man who preys on the elderly. He sends me letters, sometimes begging for a settlement, begging for mercy. I don't open them. I add them to the pile in the fireplace at home, kindling for the winter nights. Vanessa pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. She is currently serving 3 years. She tried to write to me once claiming she had changed, claiming she had found God. I threw that letter in the trash. God can forgive her. I am just a retired engineer, and that is above my pay grade. But it is Brandon I think about most as I watch the horizon. I didn't speak to him for 6 months after that night. I blocked his number. I returned his letters unopened. I needed him to know that the silence was permanent. I needed him to feel the absolute weight of his solitude. Last week, I drove past a construction site downtown. It was a new high-rise project. I stopped the car and watched from across the street. There, hauling bags of cement covered in gray dust and sweat, was my son. He looked thinner. He looked tired. He looked older. He wasn't driving a McLaren. He was taking the bus. He wasn't wearing designer sneakers. He was wearing steel-toed boots. I watched him for an hour. I saw him stop to eat a sandwich he had brought from home in a brown paper bag. I saw him laughing with a coworker, a genuine exhausted laugh. There was no pretense. There was no arrogance. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't wave. I didn't go offer to pay off his debts or buy him a hot meal. For 40 years, I thought loving my son meant cushioning his fall. I thought it meant being the safety net. I was wrong. The greatest act of love I ever performed was letting him hit the concrete. I had to break his dependency to save his life. He is struggling, yes. He is living in a small studio apartment that he pays for with his own sweat. He is paying off his debts dollar by painful dollar. But he is alive. And for the first time in his life, he is a man. Perhaps one day, years from now, we will sit down and have a coffee. Perhaps he will look me in the eye and I will see my son again, not the parasite he became. But that day is not today. Today he needs the struggle, and I need the peace. I reeled in my line. Empty hook, it didn't matter. Behind me, the cabin door opened. My friend George walked out carrying 2 cold beers. George was a retired architect I had met at the marina. He didn't know how much money I had, and he didn't care. He just liked that I knew how to fix a diesel engine. "Catch anything, Harry?" he asked, handing me a bottle. "Not a thing, George," I said, taking the beer. "It is a perfect day." I looked back at the Seattle skyline gleaming in the distance. I was 72 years old. My bank account was secure. My home was quiet. My conscience was clear. I used to be afraid of being alone. I used to be afraid of the silence. But I learned that there is a difference between being lonely and being free. I had cut the anchors that were dragging me down. I had navigated through the storm of betrayal and come out on the other side battered but unbroken. I took a sip of beer and leaned back, letting the sun warm my face. My name is Harold Bennett. I am not a victim. I am not a ATM. I am a father who loved his son enough to let him go. And my life, my real life, is just getting started. If you enjoyed this story of justice and reclaiming your dignity, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too hard on Brandon, or was it exactly what he needed? I will see you in the next story.